Smith, and I'm the new director here at the Allen County Museum, and I am very, very excited to see so many of you here today to join us with this fine program. It's such a gorgeous day outside, so I think this really says a lot for what you're going to hear within the next hour or so. That so many of you would come in from that beautiful day to listen to some wonderful stories. This is really important to me, especially as not being an Allen County native. I get the opportunity to hear the history firsthand. And we're getting this videotape so I can go back to it and check it again to make sure I have my facts straight. I'd like to introduce right now Mrs. Jean Engstrom, who is the fine person that put this program together for us.
Thank you, Pat. I've wanted to do this for a long time, and I thought you'd like it, but I didn't know we'd run out of seats.
Isn't that great?
I'm not going to talk too much here, except we'll introduce the panel. First, I have Walter White over here on your right. He is president of the Allen County Historical Society. He was born in Lima, went to Irving Elementary School, graduated in 1937 from Central High, and in 1948 from Ohio Northern. He served in the House of Representatives for 16 years and the House and the Ohio Senate for 6 years. He retired then to private practice. Walter?
Yes, thank you, Jean.
Next is Dorothy Black. She was born in Schenectady, New York, and her father was Richard Kruger.
Robert Kruger.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Lifetime member of the museum.
Yeah. And he also, along with 5 other men, were sent to Lima to work at the Lima Locomotive Works. And eventually, not too long after that, then he was sent to China to take the Shea engine. And I think Dorothy will talk more about that later. But she went to, attended Richardson School in Horace Mann, and graduated from Central High in 1935. She attended Northwest Business School and was legal secretary for a while before she started raising a family. Eventually, she did work at the Leader Store, and you all remember the Leader Store. She belonged to the Lima Garden Club, Junior Service League, served on the Y board, and loves Lima, and has always felt welcome. I was glad to hear her say that.
Always glad to come home to Lima.
Judge Robert Light was born and raised in Lima, graduated from Central High School in 1935 also. He went to OSU for 7 years where he was a cheerleader, graduated from there and earned his law degree. He was judge of Common Pleas Court here for 20 years. He was president of the Ohio Common Pleas Court for 1 term, which was the limit. And he and his wife, Joan, have 4 children scattered around the country. Mary Porter is next. She was born in Lima. She also went to Richardson and Horace Mann schools. Roosevelt graduated in 1934 from Central High, graduated from Western College at Oxford, Ohio, and the College of Music at the University of Cincinnati. In 1939, she came home from school to run the family business, which her grandfather had started in 1877. And in 1977, after 100 years, about 2 blocks from the square, she did close the business. So Mary has spent most of her life within 2 blocks of the town square.
Oh, yes.
She also traveled. She got around. Mary was active as one of the original incorporators of Emil Tellers and is now a volunteer at St. Rita's Medical Center. Joe Dunlap was born in Alger. He moved to Lima at age 1, and the date is unknown. Joe taught music theory at the University of Tulsa for 5 years and was curator of the Allen County Museum for 22 years, from 1958 to 1980. At present, he is managing the family farms in Hardin and Auglaize County. Robert L. Townsend Jr., got to do it right, started school at Roosevelt Elementary, where Ruth Fennicle Rustler taught him and made quite an impression, I guess.
I did on her.
Some of you will remember Mrs. Ressler. The family then moved out to the country on Shawnee Road, and he went to Shawnee schools, graduating in 1938. In 1942, he graduated from Ohio Northern, served in the Navy, stationed in Puerto Rico, where he met his wife, Mary. And returning home, Bob took over the family real estate business. You elected him to serve 20 years as county commissioner, and he is now on the board of trustees here at the Historical Society.
I did pretty good writing that.
Yeah, you did. Helen Mack. Helen's mother told her not to get married until she'd seen the world. So she started working at Webb Insurance, and from there went to Washington, D.C., New York, Europe, came back, and worked at the National Bank, and married her boss's brother, right?
No, he wasn't my boss.
Oh, he wasn't? Okay. Met him there, I guess. And she married Franklin Mack. While he was in service in World War II, Helen ran their business, which was Mack Camera Store, and she raised 3 children. Helen has also been very active in the community in church and charitable affairs. She served on the boards of the Y, the Churchwomen United, and the Allen County Historical Society, and she started the Christmas Tree Festival, which all of you are very familiar with, 28 years ago. And today it is sponsored by those 3 organizations that she represented. I might say also she's a gourmet cook and loves to play bridge. Okay, so now you've met the panel, and we're just going to be very informal and talk. We'll just start with Walter. And if any of you want to jump in and add something, or you think of something that has to be said, raise your hand. I'll watch for it, and we'll take your comments too. Walter?
Easy, Joe.
We'll go around the table. What is the first thing you can remember as a child?
I remember running away from home. I was born on Haller Street, between Main Street and Elizabeth Street. I was born at home, as I think a lot of the folks here on the panel will suggest that they were born at home, because that's the way it happened. But my folks moved from Haller Street and moved over on Metka Street when I was about 2 or 3 years of age. And one of the things that my mother told me was that I run away from the house, and she had a difficult time finding me. I had an estate in which we gave a bequest to St. Rose Church, and I had a long talk with the pastor telling him that this was a part of my old neighborhood, and he said, "Where did you live?" And I told him on Haller Street between Main Street and Elizabeth Street, and he says, "We call that Drug Alley now." But that was my first experience about getting away from home.
Okay. Dorothy?
Well, I was born in Schenectady, New York. My mother was Irish. My father was from Germany. He came over in a steamer with his mother and 4 sisters when he was about 7 years old, and wanted to come to America, the land of freedom, and get an education and bring his family here and grow up here and raise a family and work here and live here. He loved America, as all the German immigrants did. And he settled in New York State and married my mother, as I said, was Irish. And then he had no education past the 6th grade, neither did my mother. And I think I'm the only non-college graduate sitting at this table. But you can do it if you want to, even without a college education. You can learn to speak up and enjoy the world and travel and your kids and your family and love everybody. And so if you don't get to college, there is hope. But my dad settled here in Lima with the locomotive works and taught himself as a draftsman, and became a very good businessman here, and was sent to China because he loved to travel. I also had an opportunity. I visited Europe, Austria, the Auschwitz, where they had the Holocaust victims, Germany, all of those countries, London and Ireland, and have traveled extensively, and I loved every minute. I loved growing up in Lima. It's been good to me. It's been good to my family. I have 7 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren and 4 children. Some of them are here today. And I love them dearly, and I've always loved Lima. It's a wonderful opportunity for people. I think it's a growing community, and there's a lot of hope here, and we're seeing it. It's like springtime. I was thinking about, I had a little old boot that was about 1900 when it was made. It's handmade. And Nancy Sinatra had a song, "These boots are made for walking." And I think that Lima's made a lot of progress. And I thought, if that little boot, if that child who used that little boot, handmade, could look today and see what's going on in our world. We are out in the moon. And look at the stock market and look at the millionaires by the daily newspaper. So Lima's a part of that. And I think we all have much hope and peace and joy and power eventually. We'll learn to live together in harmony.
Thanks, Dorothy. Judge Light?
There's 4 generations of blacks here today.
Oh, yeah? 4 generations.
They all come out.
Good.
Grandpa Kruger, I toured the Lima locomotive works during World War II probably 200 times. And you wouldn't do that today.
No.
Great.
Thank you. Judge Light, your first memory? First thing you can remember?
Well, I might diverge. I was going to start by asking this for a show of hands of everybody who had not personally seen the horse-drawn Iceman that he came around. And I looked the crowd over, and I'll withdraw the question right now.
There was one over here.
Where was that one?
Back here.
What were the 2?
That's my daughter.
Bob, what were the 2 ice companies?
Lima Ice.
Lima Ice and Coal.
And the Crystal Ice Company.
Yeah.
Crystal, yeah.
Very good. Well, my name is Bob Light. I was born in home. I thought for a while I was born in St. Rita's, but they didn't open up till November of 1917, and I was born in May of 1917. My father was a young and lawyer with a brilliant career, and he and my mother started with nothing but a gleam in their eye and a basket full of dreams, I think. And he came in from Lightsville. My great-grandfather started a little town up there in Darke County. He pioneered by coming down the river. He came from, in about 1700, they came from England, and they sailed to New York, and he went down, and they eventually came down the river and up to Darke County and settled. They had already, his grandfather in turn had started a little town called New Richmond. The engineer had been from Richmond, England, I think. That's the reason they call it. It's funny how names and streets and everything else got acquainted. But my mother was interested in music and singing in those days, and she sang in every church in town. Someone asked me what I'm proudest of. I'd say my 4 children were scattered all over from San Francisco and Phoenix and Atlanta, Georgia, and one here today in Lima. Well, let's see. Now the question? What was the question again?
The first thing you remember. The first thing you can remember.
I wrote the
No
list.
senior moments.
I wrote the list. I think my mother was very good at keeping photo albums, as well as my diary, which she kept for about 50 years without missing a day. So it's a little bit hazy whether I remember from the photographs or from my own memory, but I think my first memory was when I went into the Atlantic Ocean. I think I had gone to Washington, D.C., and then down to my relatives in Richmond, Virginia. Went out to Virginia Beach and jumped in the ocean. A little kid waded in the ocean. But my dad always had a wandering foot, and we traveled all over everywhere. I have been in 50 states in these United States, and I'm very, through the help of the Army and of the Air Corps and a few other reasons. I'm glad to be here today, but one of the big things is when I was a young kid, about 4 or 5 years old, my mother took me elocution lessons, and I was not afraid of crowds, and so they taught me to talk, and I haven't learned to stop yet. So I'll stop now.
Okay, Mary Porter, first thing you remember.
Can you turn up the sound a little bit so everybody can hear that? Or hold the mic or something? Speak loud.
Is it okay to do these?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, is this on?
All right. What?
What's it back? Is it back a little?
Oh. But they can't.
The audience needs more volume.
Okay. I guess we'll push the mics around.
Talk a little louder.
Okay. I will. Okay, my name's Mary Porter. The first thing I remember, well, I'll tell you, all of my grandparents died before I was born, except my grandfather, Porter. He was B.S. Porter. Now, with initials like that, you had to be a very special person, and he was. He was, I understand, a clown in the circus. He sold lightning rods, and how he got in the music business, I'll never know, but he did. But one of the first things I remember was about him. He died when I was, I think, 5 years old. This happened when, evidently, I must have been about 4. It was one of these Sunday dinners you had at home. My 2 brothers, who were 12 and 14 years older than I, my mother and father, and my grandfather. I can see him yet sitting at the head of this table, and he was eating my mother's whole glass of jelly, grape jelly. And it was said that my father, I guess, said, "Father, you can't eat that. That's jelly. It's supposed to go on the bread." He said, "I'm going to eat it." And he did. He had no compunctions about that. He was, I wish I'd known him, to tell you the truth. I think we'd have got along just great. He loved theater. I know he took my brothers to, there was a vaudeville on Market Street. I can't remember the name of the theater. Orpheum, maybe?
It was called the Orpheum, then the State.
Yeah, you're right. And he used to take them to the theater. And I've always loved theater. I've been active in the Able Tellers. And in fact, I was one of the original incorporators of the Able Tellers. We did that right at home at my dining room table. So I'm very proud of that. And, there are a lot of things you can remember. Of course, my father then got into business. Then my 2 brothers got into business. And then I couldn't find a job teaching school. They didn't want me. So I came home to Lima, and they wouldn't even talk to me. So I just said, "I'm never coming in the music store to work." Well, I did. I went in 1939 and didn't leave till 1977.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Joe?
Yeah.
Your turn.
I wanted to ask Mary a question. There used to be a house where the Argonne Hotel is now, and it was called the Porter House. Was that yours, the residence?
Not really. I don't know.
Well, I'm a marsh rat. I was born in Alger, and my father tried to find a house in Ada and failed, and so we moved to Lima instead. One of my first memories is we'd go out to my grandparents near Alger and spend the day. We'd come home after dark. I'd be asleep in the back of the car. I was probably 3 or 4. And the first thing I remember was the smell of crude oil. I knew we were in Lima then. I knew we were. That's the truth.
Solar, yeah.
It was a smell that I loved. And when the McDonald family drilled the well at the fairgrounds for the centennial, I got that smell again, and it just is part of me, I guess.
Okay, Joe, thank you. Bob, it's your turn. Tell your first memory.
I got a lot of those, Gene.
First.
Oh. I'm probably the only one who wasn't even born in Ohio. I was born in Paducah, Kentucky, as my father was a traveling salesman. And he met my mother there and later on proposed to her. And so we started the family there, and then we moved back to Lima when I was 2. But my roots go a little deeper than that because I was doing an estate appraisal for John Pack, Bungalow Pharmacy. I think you all know where that is. And I went in there in October of 98, and I said, John, this is quite a momentous occasion for me because 100 years ago this month, my father was born right in the house that stood right here where the Bungalow drugstore. It's not there anymore. And I think that Dorothy has indicated what a wonderful place she thinks Lima, Ohio is, and I've got to totally agree with that. I grew up, my father was in the real estate business and moved my mother and I out to Shawnee Road, and my sister was born in March of 28, that was 1928. And I'd been there a couple months, and I went to my dad and I said, Dad, you know, you moved me out here in the country, and I don't have anybody to play with. He said, oh, Bob, I forgot to tell you. Down the road is a children's home, and they got 150 kids. So I made a lifelong friend there. Bill McGew, his father, John, and Mildred May were the superintendent and matron of the children's home, and that was just a wonderful place for this community. I have a lot of fond memories of that place. I used to go down there and loved, I'd have Mrs. McGew call my mother and see if I could eat dinner down there that night. But there are so many memories, and I had another one the other day. People said, did you go to school with Hugh Downs? And I said, no, he went to school with me. Well, I started in the 3rd grade, and Hugh went to Macbeth School, which was a elementary school until they started in the 7th grade. And Hugh did not join the class of 38 until he was in the 7th grade. But we all welcomed him then and never had any idea that Hugh was going to be the kind of individual that he has. And I think Hugh's made a great contribution, and I'm proud to say that I partially grew up with him. And another time, Hugh's mother had admonished him about swimming. We had the little Ottawa River down there. The first time I went down there, I remember this. The Spiker boys were there, Helen, Jean, all your brothers were there. And they said, Bob, you can go swim with us. Did you bring your bathing suit? And I said, no, nobody told me to do that. Oh, he said, you got one. You got your birthday suit. So anyway, Hugh and I were walking up Shawnee Road. There was a lot of walking being done in those days. Let me digress a minute. Mary said cut it down to 30 minutes, and I will. A lot of walking. Am I having a senior moment? No. Hugh and I had been down swimming in the little Ottawa River, just the two of us, and his mother had admonished him. I think he had symptoms of a cold or something. Said, Hugh, under no circumstances are you to go swimming today. So he slightly disobeyed her, and we were walking up Shawnee Road. He was going to my house, and he was going to his house, and he looked at me. He said, you know, could you tell I've been swimming? And I said, well, yeah. Well, he said, how would you know? I said, well, I was with you. So I've had a lot of great moments. Bob Light has put together quite a letter here, and I didn't realize this, but one spot he's got Kewpie, Nanking, Jack Yoshi, root beer stands, and different things. And I asked him, he evidently forgot about the Blue Circle, because the Blue Circle was a great place when I was growing up. But then several people here said that was quite a nefarious institution.
Well, that was a reputation that it had.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure. I was there or what?
Well, I don't know about that, but a lot of us weren't permitted to go there.
No, I couldn't.
I couldn't.
How many have ever been to the Blue Circle?
I think I am.
That's pretty good. That's a real memory. But as I said before, a lot of people have contributed to my well-being in this community. I appreciate that. Oh, but before I sign off here, there is one thing I want to announce today. The Allen County Historical Society has underwritten a book which is titled "The Institutions of Allen County," and it lists all and buildings, when they were built, who was there. Several months ago or years ago, somebody called in, who was the sheriff in 1888? Well, we don't have records. We didn't have records like that, and I guess we just said, well, we don't know, and why do you want to know anyway? But anyway. In this book will be the list of every sheriff Allen County's had since the inception of the county, which is 1804, and all of the directors of the Children's Home, of the various institutions in Allen County. So it's a book that is CSS Publishing Company, which are a local publishing company, and I talked to David Runk on Friday, and they have they printed it here, and then the binding of the book was done out of town, and the bookbinder they finished on Thursday, and they shipped it on Friday. So it's motor freight, and I would presume probably in 5 or 6 days it'll be here. We have a very interesting dust cover that we will put on here, and then this book will be available to all. First of all, we're going to make sure that it gets into all the libraries, all the school libraries, public library, of course, right next door, but all of the libraries, so that the children can use these as good reference books, and then we'll make them give you an offer at a price you can't turn down. Okay. And that's it, Jean.
Thanks, Bob. Helen, the first thing you can remember.
Well, I think...
Oh, here, wait a minute. Let's get you a microphone.
Oh, I thought I took him your glass.
I'm the youngest one of 6 children. I think I'm probably from the largest family. And the first thing I think I can remember is love, because I had these older sisters and a brother, and they just gave me so much attention, as my parents did also. So I just grew up in that kind of a household. And it was a household that I don't believe we have anymore, because we all were dressed for breakfast and also for dinner at night. And we always sat at the same place at the table. We always had linen tablecloths and napkins, and we just can't think of that now, but it's true. And I came from a family, we never had a car when I was growing up, so we walked every place, and we didn't have a carriage with a horse or anything, but I can remember being told that my parents met because my mother was visiting here in Lima, and she was in a carriage, and the horse got rambunctious and tipped the carriage over, and my father, who was just around someplace, got a hold of the horse, and so he saved my mother. So that's how they met. But I love Lima. I'm the only one here that graduated from South High School, and I'm the oldest. And I'm the eldest one on the panel, sitting next to the youngest one on the panel.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thanks, Helen. Mm-hmm. Next on the agenda, we want to talk about the services like the Iceman, the Milkman, the fruit vendors, the old bar hotel, Clang Clang, remember that?
Yes.
And the mom and pop groceries, and the coal man. Over at the McDonald House, I might say, there is a little, like a closet at the back of the kitchen with a window at the top, where the iceman would come in with a wagon and dump the ice in the old ice box. Didn't have to come in the house to do it.
Let me tell you another thing. There's about 2 tons of Stoker coal over there if anybody would like to come over and shovel it out.
That will come later.
Yeah, John P. Timmerman coming same thing.
We, to the best of my knowledge, we had 2 ice companies in Lima. One was the Lime Ice and Coal Company, and the other was the Crystal Ice. And the Lima Ice and Coal Company was located on Elizabeth Street, close to the Pennsylvania, what used to be the Pennsylvania Railroad. And the Crystal Ice Company was located on McDonald Street, fairly close to the railroad. And another thing that I remember is that we had Vincent Ranelli. Vincent Ranelli lived on the corner of McDonald and Haller Streets, and I think he was the last man in Lima that had a horse. And he kept that horse in that barn until he was told by the city of Lima he had to get it out. And one of his cries was nanos.
Yeah, I can hear that.
Yeah.
Bananas.
And another thing, we had ragmen. And ragmen bought iron, and they also bought rags. And I remember they always used to say, well, the price of rags has gone down. They were always low when they were attempting to buy. But those are some of the facts. And then the finest bakery we had around here was the Bar Hotel. They had green bakery trucks, and it had a clang on. And as they come along the streets, they would clang that bell that they had on. And the women in the various neighborhoods would gather, and they would buy their pastry. It was a long time ago.
The Wren's Bakery.
The Wren's was on North Main Street, yes.
Yes.
And then they had a lady there that I think came from
Yes,
Germany.
They did.
Very German.
And she was a very, very nice individual.
Well, I'll talk about a little bit about the Iceman, too. My father had one of the first automobiles in New York State. He bought a Chevrolet. It had side windows on it and a luggage rack and a thermometer on the top that if it got red, we had to stop and cool the engine up. We made trips back to New York State for our vacation for 2 weeks every summer. That was our vacation. And every time we would come back from New York State, my brother and I would have a contest to see which one could see the the courthouse tower first. We knew we were within shouting distance of Lima then and home. So that was a big thing, and that tower is still there. The courthouse is still there with the clock in it and everything.
Dorothy,
So, yes,
excuse me, let me be apropos to that.
okay.
Were you through?
Pardon?
Were you through? Did I interrupt you? Did I interrupt you?
No.
Oh, good. When
I
I was
wasn't-
12, 14 years old, my sister was 5 or 6. My aunt and uncle and 3 children would come from New York to visit us, and they'd spend a week here. And then their 5 and my mother and sister and I, 8 of us, got in a 4-door Model A Ford and drove from Lima, Ohio to New York, Staten Island, where they lived. And we thought nothing of it. The tourist homes were just absolutely super. I've forgotten whether they fed us dinner or not, but they did, yes. But they did feed us breakfast, and the bedrooms were just absolutely immaculate. I don't think you could find any better well-kept homes between, and it was on the Lincoln Highway.
Yeah, that was the highway.
Between line, we just get on 30 South and go right to Staten Island. But of course, there were 8 of us in the car.
Yeah, and I slept on a horsehair sofa one time in a tourist home.
Yes.
A horsehair sofa you can't stay put on. But that's what we had. Anyway, when we would get back to Lima, that was the first stop we had was the ice house, Lima Ice and Coal. And we had to get a big block of ice to put in the refrigerator to keep everything, milk and everything, cool. And when the Iceman would come around, he had a wagon with a horse, and all of the ice was in blocks, and it was covered with a big canvas cover. And then he would bring it in. He had a big leather shoulder thing to put the ice on. He lifted the ice, a big block of ice. He bought it by the pound or something. And he had an ice tongs, which we still have someplace. And he would hoist that up on his shoulder and bring it into your house. And that was your refrigeration for the week or so. But we had a big thrill with that ice house.
Everybody had an oak refrigerator. Yeah. I don't know whether everybody did. And then they had to have a pan underneath to collect all the water that dripped off that ice. Didn't keep things too cool, but it was better than nothing.
It sure was.
The reason I put that in the list, and I think you're missing the most romantic thing of all,
What was it?
was the kids, how we used to jump up.
On
You
the ice
described
wagon.
very well
Yes.
what happened,
And get
but
the
the
ice.
kids would gather from all over the neighborhood as soon as they knew that horse with a horse-drawn ice man was coming down the street, and then he'd get off a 75 or 50 or 25-foot pound over his shoulder to take into a house. But then that's when the kids would get in if he was friendly. If he was a friendly man, why, that would be all right. The kids could come in. But then what we'd rather have was if it was a little hostile, didn't like kids, that would make it much more gamey. That would be a lot of fun. You know, we'd make kind of a cop and robber thing of it. But he had an ice pick, and he'd chip those big pieces of ice loose, depending on the size of the respective ice box, and then that's when we would jump on this wagon where they had a lowered step, as you recall, and we would jump up on that and get these ice chips that he would chip off, and that was as good. It had a wooden base, and the ice chips with all that wood on there tasted just about as good as a carrot you'd get directly out of the garden, because it had a special flavor, as you remember. But as I recall, we moved in and on State Street in November 1926, and we still had an ice box. So I think the Frigidaire and all started coming in about 1927 or 28 along in there's when we started getting the ice box. But that was fun, most of all, with just getting those ice chips.
Better than Baskin Robbins.
The last horse driven or carried vehicle was the Meadow Gold, wasn't it?
Yeah.
With the horse.
Charlie.
Yeah, that was the
Babe,
last
I
of the
think.
Mohicans.
Yeah. Babe was in
Walter,
there.
you want to tell where it's at?
Well, the museum does have a Meadow Gold dairy cart that's in the process of being restored and put together, and we hope to have it out here in the assembly by and by.
Remember that, babe?
Mary, do you have anything to add to
what?
the Iceman?
Well, he already talked about Vincent and the horse.
Yeah.
That horse, I can see him, he would come down and he knew just where to stop.
That's true.
We always stopped at our house on Bryce Avenue. Another thing I remember very fondly is the grocery store. It was Biddle's grocery store.
George Biddle.
George Biddle, that's
Yes,
the man.
that's who it was.
On, I think it was Collett Street.
Collett.
Yeah, because you bet your groceries, maybe you'd spend $5 a week for groceries. And then when you would pay your bill, he would always give me a sack of candy.
Yep.
So I loved Mr. Biddle. He was my dear, dear friend.
Good.
Back to the Iceman cometh here. We had a ice in Bryce Avenue there, the Iceman would bring the ice in. Then we moved when I was 10 years old. Then we really went uptown. We had a refrigerator.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, indeed. Then later in our business, we sold General Electric and Norge refrigerators because during the Depression, nobody was interested in music too much. My father had to borrow $10, enough to pay the help in the store, $10 a piece during the Depression, because we just didn't have much business. But the refrigerators and the stove saved our necks until the war came along, the Second World War, and that's when, of course, people had money, and we had stored a lot of pianos. We stored a lot of harmonicas because they came from Germany.
Oh, yeah. I still got one.
Have you? Good.
From your brother.
But that,
Chromatic.
yeah,
I know
chromatic.
you have interurbans on here, Bob, and
Oh, yeah.
I think they played a very important role in our, at least in my lives, because the Lima City lines went through Lima, and then the Cincinnati Lake area, I think it was called.
Red Devils, they were called.
Yeah, but they came all the way from Toledo, came through Lima. They had the bus station and they went right out Shawnee Road, and they had
That was the Western Ohio.
Western Ohio. You're right there, Joe. Thanks.
There's a street by that name.
But they provided a great service for people.
I think the last of the streetcars was in 1939
Was that in Lima?
in Lima.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
The the interurban that went down South Cole Street and turned on Lakewood and
Yeah.
then out to Shawnee.
Yeah.
The kids in the neighborhood, which my husband was part of
The,
that, used to grease
streetcars.
the rails there.
Oh.
And they couldn't make the turn without almost going off the rails. But that was a great Halloween prank for the kids, to grease the rails of the interurban.
And they also pulled the trolley off.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
uh-huh.
That was the worst thing they did.
They
like
used
it
to
is
go.
today.
We used to go over South High to see the basketball games, and the fellows in the north end would take the streetcar over there, and inevitably somebody would pull the,
Yeah, right.
the trolley off there.
Oh, dear.
The streetcars used to go past our house, and of course we put pennies on the track, get them flattened out, and the interurbans went past on the same tracks. And then at night, freight trains came through, about 5 cars long, and I could hear them coming from the south, making all kinds of turns. Finally went past our house. And that's, to this day, no noise at night keeps me awake. I was brought up in noise. And I'd like to say something about the fruit wagon. It's run by a man by the name of Bonanno, I believe, and the kids always called it the banana wagon. It was a horse-drawn, good-sized horse-drawn wagon. They came into our driveway, and I swear that horse must have been drinking water all day long because it caused a flood. The kids were delighted, fascinated.
Joe, where did you live then?
South Cole. It was
406.
last block before the park.
Okay, the 400 block of
On
South
the
Cole.
wrong side of the street, the east side.
That's the wrong side?
We used to call them the West Enders.
Yeah, the West End.
Their social circle was around Matthew's drugstore that was on Jameson.
We must talk more about Matthew's drugstore before the...
Does anybody else have any, do you have anything to add to the Iceman, the Fruit Man, or the...
I have a little something I bet none of you ever experienced, because I lived by the railroad track, and near the Elida country there was all farms past the railroad, no mall or anything out there. And every so often a farmer would bring in his flock of either sheep or pigs or cows, and he would drive them down the Elida road all by himself, maybe with his kid helping. And you'd look out the window, and here would be this flock coming down the road, the middle of the road. He'd have a little stick, and he'd tap them if they got out of line. He was driving them to the Lima Packing Company for slaughter. And that used to scare me silly. I'd think, oh, the poor cows and pigs and all.
And that was on the Almond...
That was Elida and out there by Jameson Avenue and Charles Street.
Packing was clear through town.
Yes, he had to drive them
Center.
clear down there. But that was interesting.
What were the mom and pop groceries?
Like Biddles or anything.
Yeah, like I was talking about.
This-
Biddles.
Run
Where
by
you
a
bought on
family.
account.
There was a grocery
Charged
store in every few blocks.
Paul
There's
Schenck
no.
had one right across the
Always.
500 block West Market Street near
And you
the
charged your
Timberland Ford.
groceries?
That's true.
And Basin had one on
Who?
Basin on South Main.
Yes.
They were owned by couples, is that?
Yeah.
Just families.
Yeah, I don't know whether Mrs. Schenck, I know Paul, the father, worked in there, and the kids did.
Then the Wright had a whole chain of them,
Right.
of small groceries.
All right, do you want to talk about Matthews and what you did for fun?
You made dates there. You met your boyfriend and made dates.
You made,
goes the rest of the
okay, it was a
afternoon.
hangout, wasn't it?
We'd buy a 10-cent pop, and Warren Matthews would let us sit there all evening long. He was the nicest man. He and his son ran it. And if you didn't get a date when you were at Matthews, you were out.
If you didn't get a date there, you had to go out to Blue Circle.
Yes, we weren't allowed.
Yeah.
Walter, what do you have to say about it?
Well, of course, I wasn't of that Matthews set. You had to live in the West End in order to be in that group. We were the Davis Drugstore group. A great many of us went by the Davis drugstores. They were located on South Metcalf. They were one. Well, there used to be one on Bell Fountain, and one was on the corner of Bryce and Metcalf. And it's there where we had our lemon and chocolate sodas, and but we were that group that was close up there to the Pennsylvania Railroad tracks.
Ellen, where was your hangout?
Butler's Drugstore.
Butler's Drugstore. All the drugstores.
Right.
That was on the corner of Main and Kibbe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any butlers here?
I don't think so. I haven't seen
You know,
I think they're in Florida.
one of the best recollections I have of Carrie Matthews Drugstore was not of the usual content, but I married Joni Burke, and she was nothing but an animal lover, and she had a big German Shepherd, and we'd always go in there walking from our home into Matthews Drugstore, and the big thrill of the afternoon was to have our dog Kim sit beside the table. In fact, he'd sit under the table, and we would give him a nickel ice cream cone with one of those cherries on the top of it. That was the big afternoon. We'd get our dog would give a special ice cream cone for our dog every time he went in.
Cherry on top.
Loved it.
The cherry on top.
With a cherry on top.
Yeah.
Matthews person?
Oh, yes.
What happened?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you.
Tell you about that.
Well, we used to meet at Matthews. We walked from Central High School. I mean, that was nothing in those days. You walked, and we did. And I was supposed to be a nice girl, but I must say, we listened to a lot of stories that were not very nice. I'm not sure I understood what they meant, but I listened to them, and I heard a lot of them. But I loved it. We spent about a nickel, I think, for a vanilla Coke. That was my favorite.
Bob, where did you go to?
I went to Matthews. I remember the chocolate Cokes there.
Chocolate? Yeah.
And they were Mr. Matthews. I can see him right today, standing back there,
I can too.
jerking those sodas. And another time, I can remember going downtown on Saturday. My father would give me a quarter, and I would go to the Lyric, I think, with a cowboy movie for 15 cents. And I'd come out and go to Keltner's Drugstore, which was right, you know where that was? Right on High Street.
5-cent ones.
Well, I think raised the price. It was 10 cents when I went there, or at least I told my dad it was 10 cents.
Okay.
Mr. Matthews was kind of a sad case. He was a real pharmacist, and that was his interest. Mm-hmm. He opened his store, and it was flooded with kids asking for Cokes.
Must have been awful.
They also, kids performed various kinds of stunts in front of the stores in warm weather.
Like?
Well, Tom Gray could put a bottle of Coke in his mouth and let it drain out completely into it. A couple other kids had someone on his back. They broke the front window, broke the door window.
You remember who they were?
Yeah, it was Jack Schoonover. Someone else. I don't know. But very often you'd go to Matthews and there'd be crowds of automobiles parked there. You'd go inside and there wasn't a soul. They'd come and go off together then.
They didn't buy very much either.
No, but I must say their Cokes were the best Cokes I've ever.
Yeah, they were. They were fountain Cokes.
They made them right there.
He made them, right? He bought the syrup and he made the fountain Coke right there.
You could ask for any flavor with the Coke. I always ordered a grapefruit Coke, which I wish I could have today.
My son saw the young Matthew boy, was it Warren, too long ago, and Warren remembered all of the fun times we kids had there. He said that was the best. He enjoyed it too. Maybe his father didn't, but he did.
I tried to call him yesterday and couldn't get an answer. Okay, let's talk about other entertainment. The radio.
Well, the radio was good entertainment.
Oh, sure
in the evenings, there were especially good programs, and during the day, there was Jack Armstrong. There was Little Orphan Annie, and Little Orphan Annie, her sponsor was Ovaltine, and if you got a can of Ovaltine and you took the top off and you sent it in with 10 cents, you got a Little Orphan Annie decoder pin. And I got one or two, and I remember when my mother died, I searched the whole house, and I couldn't find the single decoder pin in the house. But then there was Jack Armstrong and some other children's programs, but there was excellent programs in the evening. Don't remember most of them, but they were excellent programs. Lum and Abner, Amos and Andy.
Go ahead.
Before those people, our next door neighbors had one of the very first radios in their basement, and we'd go over and they had earphones, but they'd take them apart. You could use one phone and pass the other to someone else. But the big show at that time was Harry Snodgrass, who was a pianist and a prisoner, and he would play from his cell always 3 o'clock in the morning. I think it came from Pittsburgh.
Well, your folks are very tolerant, Joe.
Where was his cell?
Your folks were very tolerant if you were up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
I think one of the real good programs was Amos and Andy, which was a black couple, and they were very popular on the radio.
Well, since music was our business, I remember my mother and father went to New York, came back with the first radio. It took a whole table. You have the radio here and the batteries over here and the earphones here. And I remember we were very excited. We got KDKA from Pittsburgh. That was a big deal.
Way over there.
Way over there.
That's the only station east of the Mississippi that has a K prefix.
The Lima Telephone and Telegraph Company in those days would install or put receivers in various people's houses, and you could subscribe to that. And I guess the only radio program you could hear is the program that they gave you.
You didn't have 92 stations.
You didn't have 92 stations.
Oh, yeah, I do. The old radios had tubes in them, not like they are now. And we had a thing down at the store where we would test tubes. They'd bring them in sacks full, and we'd test the darn things. That's the only time I ever got a little reward. Somebody gave me 50 cents one time for testing all the radio tubes.
Did you charge?
No, it was free. But that 50 cents meant a lot to me.
And then there were this.
I was just going to say, I never got paid for several years when I was working at the store.
Yeah, we're
Finally,
board,
2 years I worked there. Nobody paid me.
Look at the experience you had there.
Oh, great.
Thanks a lot.
But I finally decided there was a coat I wanted, and it was up at Madison's. It was a red coat. And my mother said, well, why don't you ask your father to pay you? So I did, and he did pay me.
That's all.
Yeah, that's all it took. Gee, if I'd known that, I would have started a lot early.
My salary at Clarence Klinger's law office was $15 a week. I paid my mother board $5 and bought myself I. Miller shoes, which were the thing at that time. Salaries weren't that.
The most marvelous thing, the remarkable thing, is that when we were born, they didn't even have radio, and it's hard for the generation today to realize with television and computers and on the net and so forth, what on earth it was like in those days that we didn't even have radio when we were born.
We read a lot.
You'd make your own fun. You'd take a ride out in the country or do some crazy thing that would be entertainment. But there were so many programs that I think most of us remember. In addition to those mentioned, there was, there was the Shadow, or was it the Hermit?
Shadow, the Hermit, Hermit's Cave.
Hermit, and I think Buck Rogers, maybe, I don't know.
Buck Rogers.
But we had so many of those programs that's what the big the big evening was, to go back into the even 1935 or 36 or along in there. The big evening, I don't think television came in till early 50s, wasn't it? We'd sit around and listen to the radio programs, and that was all around the fraternity house, and all the guys would gather because that was the big entertainment of we didn't have anything else to do on Saturday or Sunday evenings like that. we'd go out and watch the radio, listen to the radio.
But there is something that we did go to, and that's to picture shows.
Forever.
And, there was the Ohio Theater in Sigma and the State, and then there was the Quilna and the Lyric.
Rialto.
There was the Rialto and the Royal. They were in the east end of the square. Those two, and then there was the Majestic, and
10 cents a ticket, wasn't it?
sometimes 5 cents.
Judge, apropos to you relating to radios, I think the generation prior to the advent of the radio, they were able to entertain themselves, and I think that's sadly lacking in some of the youth today. I don't say all of it, but to be able to say, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and I don't need to sit in front of a boob tube, or I don't need to sit in front of the radio, or this is what I'm going to do to entertain myself. And I think that was by necessity we had to do that.
And that's when you sold pianos, Mary.
For my kids to watch.
We
Lassie.
need to take a break, I'm sorry, because they need to change tapes. And while they change tapes,
The one thing that hasn't changed, Gene, is the movie. They used to have the movie, today they have the movie. I don't know what else has not changed.
Not the
Of course,
quality.
the movies have changed a little bit, too.
Yes.
One movie house one place we didn't talk about, and that was the Frode Opera House. And the Frode Opera House put on a lot of interesting programs, and had a lot of very famous people here.
Spencer Tracy.
Spencer Tracy was here. I remember my mother took me on 2 different occasions. One was Sparkplug. I don't know what on earth it was all about, but and then another one. And then later it became a movie house. And I worked for the Lima Cord Sole and Heel Company. We had our offices in the Frode building. And at that time, the Frode Opera House was abandoned. You could walk in there, but it was sort of eerie to just walk in the old theater. But it was a prominent place in the early days of Lima.
What a shame they tore that down.
It is.
I know.
It is.
you have a story about the Frode Opera?
That's where I made my first money. When I was 15, I think I was a sophomore in high school, I had a musical, Sally, Irene, and Mary, there. And they auditioned for dancers for the chorus, and I was one of the ones that they chose, and so it was just lots of fun. And at that time, that's what I was going to be, a dancer. I was going to make my living and go on the stage and whatever. But of course that didn't happen. But it was just lots of fun. And my pay, I believe, was $10. And I asked my father for an excuse from school because I had to practice every 2 weeks. And he said, well, he didn't think he needed to write one. And of course he didn't, because everybody knew I was in it anyway. So it was fun. But I did quite a bit of research on the Frode Opera House and gave a talk about it to the docents and also to the annual meeting one year about the Frode Opera House.
Does anyone remember when the Leader Store had a playroom for their children that were shopping with them? On the 3rd floor, they had a little enclosed area. They had a slide and a little swing and sandbox and everything. And I thought, what a wonderful idea for today. Instead of kids milling through the mall, have a little place for them to play.
Joe, did you want to say something about the theaters?
Well, I remember the Frode Opera House very well. They always, usually they had a vaudeville, which was pretty good, and with a live orchestra, followed by a movie. I think they had an organ. It was kind of a simple type of organ.
Yes, they did.
But you see it out here in the exhibit, a miniature, but it was all done in walnut and butternut. And as I recall, the drapes were all a heavy dark blue. I was always thrilled to go into there.
Is it my understanding, Joe, that that was the largest or the only opera house between New York and
It
Chicago?
was supposed to be, yeah, and there's a theater in New York City that was copied after it.
After the Throat?
Stuyvesant was done.
I don't know whether it's altogether known, but allied to, let's go back to my mother's diary. It started in 1906, and at that time she was going to the Throat Opera House, and when Ben Throat was making money before John D. Rockefeller put him out of business, he had not only built the Throat Opera House, which was on the corner there where Kresge's on High and Main Street, but around the corner from where the Argonne drugstore was, next door to that, which is now a vacant lot, he had also built a little hotel. Do you remember that, Mary? He built a little hotel, and so the actors could go down one block and into that hotel. In between was, when I was going through there, was conveniently located what was known as Morley's Restaurant. Gene and Fred went to school with us, and you would go into that restaurant where the High Street Market was, and later Hart's Jewelry Store, and you would go in there, and sitting over at the next table would be these famous, the people that became famous, including, as mentioned, Spencer Tracy, Carol Lamborn, Basil Rathbone, and just a fistful of famous actors and actresses, and we'd be eating chicken giblets and everything else. That was their specialty. And the next table over were these other people. Spencer Tracy, the story goes of him, he was living with his wife at Moreland Manor, right across the street from where the Elks is now, when he received a telegram, and he and his wife were staying there, and he had an old rattletrap of a car, and he got this contract by way of a telegram, and he said, "Come on, baby," he says, "we're going to go into show business," and he grabbed his wife and left from the Throat Opera House and went to California and became interested in the movies. It was grand old days, and I remember several of them: Roses of Picardy, Alice Blue Gown, and I forget whether it was here or Findlay. My family's always been inclined towards entertainment, including my 4 children. But I think one of the most thrilling things was the gorilla. And that would just scare the dickens out of you, because in one point of the story, the gorilla would come running down the aisle, and everybody would be just frightened to death. And you'd walk up there, and then the gorilla hand would come out of the back of the stage, on stage, and then he'd just miss somebody, and he'd walk away from him, and then the gorilla would do this. Now they finally, I don't know how the show came out, but that was a place where they had a lot of people. Madame Schudma Heights, what was the name of the minstrel shows? They had just a little bit of everybody went to the Throat Opera House, and as was mentioned, it was used for I think sometimes movies and sometimes vaudeville, a little bit of everything. And as Bob mentioned, the thing was that it was halfway. Lima is about halfway between Pittsburgh and Chicago, so the troops would go to Lima and then on over to Chicago. That's the way it blended into a very successful program.
You touched on the High Street Market. I have some very vivid memories of that. And my grandfather and grandmother used to take me there on a Friday night, and they had Hannah's Fish Market.
Fish market, yeah.
And you could buy almost any kind of fish you wanted there. And oysters, gee, I remember my grandmother would buy a couple dozen oysters and bring them home and fry them. And should I back away there?
Yeah.
Bring home a couple dozen oysters and fry them. And I just have, I don't know why, but I do have rather vivid memories of being in that High Street Market with my grandmother and grandfather.
They open daily, were they?
Oh, yeah. 7 days a week, I think, Joe.
And they had a restaurant too, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. That's,
And
I think
it
a lot.
smelled like fish.
Yeah. Gus began his arc of sweets there as well.
In the marketplace was all these stalls with the farmers market and everything all around it, and then in the middle they had benches and they served you food all the way around there from the various.
It had a roof.
Oh yeah, yes, yeah. But it was quite unique for Lime, Ohio, I think, and
Are you talking about the farmer's market?
no.
Down
The high street.
High Street.
High Street Market.
That's where
Farmer's
Clemens
market was
started, I
fun.
believe.
Oh, I remember
Clemens
that
Bakery?
distinctly.
Yeah, farmer's market.
But as I say, that was quite a unique market for Lime, Ohio. And
Simonella's had a booth in there.
did they?
I think so.
Yes, they did.
And
They're still here.
That's
Could
true.
I go back to the organs,
Sure,
theaters?
go ahead, Joe.
The best theaters in Lima, the Lyric and the Sigma and the State, had pipe organs. This is one of them. It's similar to that, and they were accompanied the silent films. And the trouble is, some of the artists they got to play the organ didn't seem to watch the picture very closely. And there was one of the story of Christ, and at the end of it, he wasn't off the screen yet, and this organist came in with the loudest jazz. Now, the Quilna Theater, which was my favorite, had played by rolls, like a player piano. They had 2 rolls, and you could play one until a mark occurred, and then you'd start the other one, so you'd have change your music very easily. But Lou Cunningham was the manager of that theater, I believe, and he had good taste in music. And some of the roles he selected were just marvelous. I remember Peer Gynt and Mendelssohn and Rachmaninoff. And so
This is a music major talking here.
so Quilna was a good theater to go to for music.
Did your father have something to do with the theaters?
He was one of the builders of the Sigma, and I think he had an interest in the Frode Opera House. Maybe I'm not clear about that.
So you were involved in entertainment too.
I could always get in the Sigma free.
Oh, that I see that.
Till
It
one
pays to have somebody, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To know somebody. How about dances? I've heard about the McCullough Park and the.
Frode Park.
Yeah, from
They had a dance in the pavilion
Okay.
there. Yeah.
You want to talk about it?
I can't tell you too much. Frank Harmon, I think, maybe organized the dances out at Frode Park. Of course, the shelter is still there, and I think they do have dances still. But every Friday night, they had a live orchestra, and they charged for the dances, but everyone was very well behaved. And
Do any of you remember the park at McClinic, where McClinic Lake is now?
No, I don't know.
Oh, they had a dance hall, they had a roller coaster.
Can't hear, Bob.
McClinic Park. You remember that?
yeah,
They had a roller coaster. They had big dance floor. In fact, for years the Elks had their summer picnic out there, and it was quite an event for them. But I can remember as a young fellow that people were going to. I can't even think. Seraph Park. What was the name of that park then? It wasn't McClinic.
McCullough.
McCullough.
No, I'm sorry,
McCullough's
Macbeth.
was not there, though.
Macbeth.
McCullough's Lake was
McCullough's was Schoonover.
McCullough's was on the east end.
Oh, all right.
Macbeth
Macbeth Park.
Yeah.
They had the roller coaster and everything. In fact, at Macbeth Park, you were talking about the Iceman. Right across the road on Spencerville, they had a wooden barn there that they stored the ice in for all winter long. They'd be chopping ice out there, and then in the summertime, the Iceman would come out there and pick it up and deliver it to the people.
We had somebody in the audience who wanted to say something. Beulah?
Yeah, please. Speak up.
Back in the mid-30s, there were several music teachers in town who had the reputation that they had been renowned performers on the piano in Europe and been on the big stages and everything. We had Madame Morris and Madame Berlino. There were others, I think, but those were the only 2 names that come to my mind.
And they taught here in Lima.
Yes, they
taught here
did.
in Lima.
Clifford?
Nobody's mentioned Piper's Grocery. That was always a big thing to me. We lived out in the country and put them in here in the horse and dug in. I had a horse there on Elizabeth Street, the hitching rack on Elizabeth Street. This picture we got downstairs, if I was a little wider, you could see the hitching racks on Elizabeth Street there. And we come in from Shawnee, and that was a great thing.
Okay.
There's a hand over there.
Oh, I didn't see. Yes?
I'd like to ask the panel and anyone else that want to answer. Do you remember the mill that sat on the bank of
Ottawa River.
Well, when I was a kid, we called it that. And it sat on the bank there on Bellefontaine Avenue. It would be really on the southeast corner of the river there, just east of the bridge, right on the bank. I believe it was a four-runner Holdridge Mills, but I'm not sure if somebody could enlighten me there. They tore that mill down about 1923 or 24, I believe.
He was Joe's great uncle.
Hiram Holdridge. Yeah.
Want to know if.
Yeah, he used to come to our house every Sunday night with a
Here
bag.
we've got an answer. Okay, Jim.
I can't tell you much about the mill, but he always came out to our house. He was a violinist, or a collector of violins, rather, and he'd come out the house with a bag of cornmeal and have Mother make cornmeal mush for him. And he'd try out my mother's violin and told her it was about as good as a cigar box. But he himself had some very, very precious things. He had a violin bow, which you don't think is being particularly wonderful, but I don't know how, it was almost, I don't know how much he got it, but I have it. And he gave Mother a second one, a hill bow, which brought $5,000. The turret, the fine one, I don't know how much he got for it, but it would be much more than that.
Was this his uncle he's talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a great uncle.
Yes, Joe's great uncle was Hiram Holdridge. I don't know whether you heard that or not.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I'd like to tell you what the Ottawa River did to me. The young man and I, we were about 12 or 14. He subscribed to Popular Mechanics, and he came over to my house one day, and he said, "Bob, let's build this boat, and we can take it down to the Ottawa River, and we'll play it down there." So we went all winter long with that boat. We caulked it. We got boards. We got a bicycle crank so that we put a propeller on it, and it would make that boat go. So by golly, we finally launched that boat on the Ottawa River, and we had the nicest ride you'd ever had.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I want to tell you what. 2 days later, we had the biggest flood you've ever seen in your life on the Ottawa River, and that was the end of that boat.
Oh, it was life-saving. I launched mine in one of the lakes in Frote Park, and it sank.
I never just thought we'd get into these boat stories.
Yeah.
Do any of them remember the city park when they had animals in cages out there?
The bear,
Foxes,
bear pit.
and bears, and smell, didn't it? Oh, and the eagles, they had an eagle in a cage, and the park was really wonderful to go to. We used to spend a lot of time there. But that's all done. The bear cave's gone and everything.
There were a couple more things. I know we've gone over an hour here, but I think we're interested. Valera, do you have something?
Well, I was going to talk a little about what they were talking about radio. The radio networks at that time were not NBC, CBS. They were the Blue Network and the Red Network and Mutual. And most of the dramas came out of Chicago. And the daytime soaps were 15 minutes long. And there were a lot of people who worked 2 or 3 soap operas. So they would go to one studio and be one character for one soap opera. Then they'd go down the street to another studio and be another character just by picking up a script. So that's how a lot of these actors made their living. But in one case, and I knew this to be a fact, there was one producer director that was having all kinds of problems with the cast because these were theater people. And to do radio, they figured they knew their acting ability better than this producer did. So he would tell them what to do, and they would do the part like they thought they wanted to do. So he got so upset with them, and he kept telling them he was going to fire them all. Well, they had contracts, so he couldn't just outright fire them. So what he did, he had the script writer write a script where this whole big bunch of people got on a bus to go out to a picnic. The bus crashed and everybody got killed. That's actually a true story. They started from square one and the plot story.
No, obviously.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the way you dressed.
I can say something about that. I think the greatest thing that ever happened was the pantsuit, as far as I'm concerned. If you ever tried to play an organ with pedals with a skirt on, it was pretty difficult. And another thing, then I decided I was going to play the cello. So I had, of course, being in the music store, we had a cello. And I got one of the symphony men to come over, and he tried to teach me to play the cello, but he had to put a raincoat over my lap so I could get the cello between my knees. And my friends, I'd practice at home, and they would stand outside and howl. They said, everything you play sounds like Happy Birthday.
Anybody else want to talk about
Well, there used to be a rigid rule, at least it was in my house, that a boy could not wear long pants until he become 12. And so we had to wear these knickers, and then when you become 12, something magic happens. Then you got your long pants, and you were permitted to have a bicycle. And I don't know whether those were the general rules, but they were the rules in my house.
Sounds like a prelude to Bar Mitzvah.
Yes.
I'd like to make one comment about Joe Dunlap. In my moving over to State Street from 711 College Avenue as a kid, I became acquainted with Jack Schoonover, Joe Dunlap, and the kids in that neighborhood. They're a wonderful group. But the biggest thing, if you didn't realize it, Joe has a master's degree from Yale, so he's probably one of the most learned musicians in the crowd. But anyway, the thing that I always remember about Joe is he was so advanced in his piano playing that all of the kids would always run over to Joe's house, and after we get through reading about Richard Halliburton and Climbing the Matterhorn and Believe It or Not and the other books we would read, we would ask Joe to play the piano, and he always would sit there and accommodate us. We'd play Claire de Lune, that's when I first began that, and Claude Debussy's Gollywog's Cakewalk, that's right.
Cliff was the greatest artist, the pianist, though. He had his own way.
Who was that, Cliff?
Cliff Wood.
Oh, Cliff Wood.
I've never heard anything like it before.
I didn't even know he played the piano.
As far as dress goes, no one wore blue jeans when we were in school.
Never heard of them.
With 2 or 3 exceptions.
They were for farming, weren't they?
No, they
had bib overalls then.
Oh.
Well, these were blue jeans. Bill Merritt and Tom Sawyer wore blue jeans.
We used to wear knickers, they'd come down to the knees, and then you wear socks, like Walter referred to.
They all wore sweaters.
And that was a sweater age. When you get to be a senior citizen, you get to revert to that area.
Does anybody want to mention anything about the Depression?
Getting back to Hiram Holdridge.
Well,
maybe
okay.
He was very close to my mother, and he was a director, I think, of the old National Bank. And he finally sold Mother some stock in the company. He says, "You'll always thank your old Uncle Hypey for that." 2 years later, the bank went under, and she had double indemnity to pay. That was the start of the Depression. They had just built this beautiful building, which still stands, of course.
The National Bank?
Yeah. No, the other one.
Lyman Trust.
Well, they were both started to build about the
Where
same.
is the Lyman Trust now?
On the corner.
That's the court, the big one on the
That's the
square.
National Bank.
Oh, okay, the National. Yeah.
I was in the dentist's office one day at the National Bank building when I was just a kid, and my dentist was Dr. Negelson. And he left me sitting in the chair while he went to check on the stock market, which was up, and the fall of the stock market had everybody. Oh, it was a disastrous time. But he left me sitting in the chair while he went to check on his stock to see if he was busted or not.
Found out what was important.
Yeah, they didn't have all the people now that are telling you what the stock market's doing one day and the next day, and everybody's on the internet.
The Metropolitan Bank was one of the soundest. I think it's one of the few that didn't go under. But there was a time when they needed $1 million real quick. So they got Ott Plummer, who's the Cadillac dealer and really a stunt driver, to drive a Cadillac up to Toledo. And they took Jim McDonnell along with his guns to protect him. And they did it one day, I think. Brought back $1 million, saved the bank.
Cash.
Temporarily.
That pair, you'd have to know them.
Wasn't the city savings and loan pretty solid during that time too?
I think so.
On the corner of Elizabeth and Market?
Yes.
City loan.
Yes, city loan. One of the things, when we were kids, they had a banking system in the schools. And you could go to the Old National Bank or the Lima Trust Company and put in a nickel or a dime each week. And when the banks went under, of course we didn't get our money. But one of the things that the banks did a little later on, they made good all of those school bank accounts. And each person that had a little money in that school banking account finally got it.
With interest?
I don't remember whether there was interest or whether there wasn't.
Yeah, I do.
I took the trouble this morning to go back in my mother's diary to see the dates if it's any interest to anybody. It was April 28, 1931 that the old National City Bank building went under. And they finally closed the door at 2 o'clock, and that was the end of that one. Actually, it was they had a run on the Lima Trust Company April 24th of 1931, but they sustained that run, and the big hullabaloo was on February 25, 1932, when the Lima Trust Company went under, and my dad called my mother, and they said that happening. Of course, my mother is curious. She wants to run downtown. She has some money in the bank anyway. She said describes the whole town was all upset. There was just people milling all over. The full police force was out there. Some of them had guns. Some of the civilians had guns. But they finally closed out the trust company in 32. Of course, the big crash came in October of 29. But it took that long for the banks to close up. But the first one that went under was the old National City Bank building, and then a few months later, it was the Lima Trust Company. That's about time orientation.
During that time, Bob, remember our annual book for when we graduated? There was no money hardly, and we had a real cheap one. It wasn't a very ornate thing, but it was because of the Depression, and we couldn't afford anything
Well,
much.
they closed the schools when I was a sophomore in April because they didn't have any money.
And the rest of us who were not seniors were unhappy with that. At least that's my recollection. But only people went to school. You seniors, right? You had to finish it up.
Yeah, that's right.
That was a class of 32. They ran out of money, and the rest of us had to stop early.
Well, I think we'll have to stop. We have gone over 25 minutes, but I think everybody's been interested.